The Bible was still open in my hands, the words of the Gospel of John blurring into a blinding white glare when my heart simply stopped. One moment I was standing behind the pulpit, the sanctuary plunged into darkness by a spring storm, preaching to a congregation gathered by candlelight. The next, a flash of light brighter than 1,000 suns hit me, and I felt myself slipping away from the wooden lectern, falling into a silence so deep it felt like the bottom of the ocean. My name is Burton. I am 52 years old, and 13 days ago I died for 20 minutes. That silence was not empty. It was a heavy, living silence, like the pause between a lightning strike and the thunder that follows. I felt my spirit untethered from the weight of my clothes, the pressure of the floor, and the very air I had been breathing. For a moment, there was a sense of rushing upward, as if I were being pulled by a magnet toward a great, welcoming warmth. When my eyes adjusted, I wasn't in the sanctuary anymore. I wasn't in the hospital. I was standing in a meadow that seemed to breathe with its own rhythm. Every blade of grass was a vibrant shade of green that felt like it had been painted by a hand that loved every single molecule of its creation. The sky above wasn't just blue. It was a deep, resonant sapphire that seemed to hum with music. I looked down at my hands. The age spots were gone. The slight tremor I'd developed in my right hand over the last few years had vanished. I felt a surge of energy, a lightness of being that I hadn't felt since I was a child, running through the fields of my grandfather's farm. The constant noise of the world, the worries about the church budget, the concerns for the sick in my congregation, the endless notifications on my phone, it was all gone. In its place was a peace so profound it felt like a physical weight, a golden blanket wrapped around my soul. Then I saw him. He was standing near a stream that sparkled like liquid diamonds. He wasn't wearing a crown or glowing in a way that hurt the eyes. He was wearing a simple robe, his feet bare on the soft earth. But the moment he looked at me, the air around us seemed to solidify with love. His eyes held the history of the world, yet they saw only me. I knew him instantly. I didn't need a sign. I didn't need to see the wounds. Every cell in my spiritual body recognized its creator. I fell to my knees, the soft grass cool against my skin. I tried to speak, to offer some prayer or some confession, but my voice failed me. I simply wept. He walked toward me, and each footstep seemed to cause the ground to glow momentarily. When he reached me, he placed a hand on my shoulder. The sensation was like a warm current of electricity, washing away every doubt, every fear, and every piece of baggage I had carried for 52 years. "Burton," he said. His voice was like a melody I had been trying to remember my entire life. "Rise, my friend. I have brought you here because there is a truth your heart has forgotten, and my people are starving for it." He helped me to my feet, and as he did, the meadow around us began to dissolve, not into darkness, but into a different kind of reality. We were suddenly standing in a space that felt both intimate and infinite. It was a hall of light where the walls were made of what looked like shimmering curtains of water. At the center of this space was a wooden table. It looked old, weathered, and sturdy, much like the one I had in my study back home. On the table sat a single loaf of bread and a silver chalice. The bread was unlike any I had ever seen. It wasn't just a physical object, it was pulsing. A soft, amber light emanated from the crust, expanding and contracting like a slow, deep breath. Beside it, the wine in the chalice didn't just sit still. It swirled with a life of its own, looking like a miniature galaxy captured in a cup. I could see stars, nebulas, and deep ribbons of crimson and violet moving within the liquid. "Do you know what this is?" he asked, his voice echoing through the vastness of the hall. "Communion," I whispered, my heart racing. "The bread of life and the cup of salvation." He looked at the elements on the table with a look of such profound longing and love that it broke my heart. "You call it a sacrament. You call it a ritual. You teach your people that it is a memory of a meal shared long ago. But Burton, look deeper. See it through the eyes of the Spirit." He reached out and touched the bread. As his finger made contact with the crust, a wave of light exploded from the loaf. Suddenly, I wasn't just looking at bread. I was looking at a doorway. I saw a vision of a crowded room in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago. I could smell the roasted lamb, the dusty air, and the sweat of 12 men who were terrified and confused. I saw him take the bread, and as he broke it, I saw that same amber light flow from his hands into the bread. But the vision didn't stop there. The scene began to layer upon itself. I saw a group of believers in a cold, damp cave during the Roman persecutions, huddling together and breaking a small piece of grain. I saw a grand cathedral with incense rising to the rafters as a priest lifted a golden wafer. I saw a small house church in a modern city where people sat on folding chairs and passed a plastic cup. And then I saw my own church, that dark sanctuary 13 days ago, where the candles flickered against the storm. In every one of these scenes, the light was the same. It wasn't a different light for different times. It was the exact same light, existing in all those places at once. I realized that the bread wasn't just a symbol of his body. It was a physical anchor into a moment that never ends. When we touch the bread, we aren't just remembering a past event. We are stepping into a divine now that is always happening. This is the mystery, Jesus said, his eyes fixed on mine. When I said, "This is my body," I was giving you a way to touch eternity. In your world, you are bound by minutes and hours. You think of me as someone who lived back then. But through this bread, I am always present. Every time you eat, you are pulling the life of the kingdom into the realm of the dying. He then showed me a vision of the human soul. It looked like a garden, but for many people, the soil was gray and cracked. I saw how the stresses of life, the bitterness of old arguments, and the constant drain of selfishness acted like a drought. These souls were brittle. They looked as if a strong wind would turn them to dust. Then I saw what happened when one of these people took communion with a heart of true hunger. As they swallowed the bread and the wine, I watched the amber light and the galaxy wine enter their chest. It didn't just go into their stomach, it exploded into their spirit. It was like a spiritual irrigation system. The light flowed into the cracks of the soul, softening the hard ground, washing away the gray dust, and bringing a vibrant, glowing green life back to the garden. It was a literal transfusion of his health into our sickness. "My people try to survive on words alone," he said gently. "They read the book. They listen to the songs, and they think that is enough. But the spirit needs to be fed just as the body does. If you do not eat, you grow weak. If you do not drink, you perish." Many of my followers are walking through their lives in a state of spiritual starvation because they treat this table as a decoration rather than a feast. I watched as another vision unfolded. I saw a woman sitting in a pew, her face lined with the weight of a recent tragedy. She felt empty, abandoned by God, and lost in her grief. When the communion tray came to her, she took the bread almost out of habit, but for a split second, she closed her eyes and whispered, "I need you." In that moment, the light from the bread didn't just glow, it surged. It wrapped around her like a glowing suit of armor. I saw her internal wounds, the jagged edges of her broken heart, begin to knit back together. She didn't walk away with all her problems solved, but she walked away with a strength that wasn't hers. She had been recharged by the very life of God. This is not a reward for the perfect. Jesus told me, his hand still resting on the table. It is medicine for the sick. It is the bread of heaven given to those who are stumbling on earth. When you tell them of this, tell them to come not because they are good, but because they are hungry. Tell them that I am waiting at the table with the only thing that can truly sustain them. I began to understand that the bread was like a concentrated dose of heaven's atmosphere. We live in a world where the air is heavy with shadows, but the bread carries the oxygen of the kingdom. To take it is to breathe again. To drink the wine is to let the very joy that fueled the creation of the stars run through our veins. "Look again," he commanded. He gestured toward the chalice. I leaned in, and the swirling galaxy within the wine began to expand. It grew until it filled my entire field of vision. I wasn't just looking at wine anymore. I was looking at a map of human connection. I saw millions of points of light, each one representing a person. Between these points were thin, shimmering silver lines. "This is the blood," he said. "Not just the blood that was shed on the cross, but the life force that connects the entire family. When you drink of the cup, you are not just connecting to me. You are being woven into the fabric of every soul that belongs to me. You are drinking from the same reservoir of life as the person sitting next to you and the person on the other side of the planet." I saw a vision of a man in a prison cell, alone and forgotten by the world. He had a small piece of bread and a sip of water he had saved, and he was praying. As he ate, the silver lines of light flared up around him. Even though he was behind stone walls, he was connected to a grandmother praying in a village in Africa, to a child in a hospital in London, and to me, standing in my pulpit in the middle of a storm. They were all pulsing with the same rhythm. The cup was the great eraser of loneliness. The world seeks to divide, Jesus said. It wants you to believe you are an island alone in your struggles. But the table is where the many become one. There is no rank here. There is no wealth or poverty. There is only the body, held together by the life I gave. When you take the cup, you are saying yes to the family. You are accepting that their strength is yours and your strength is theirs. I felt the weight of this truth. I thought of the petty arguments I had witnessed in church meetings, the divisions between denominations, and the way we often look at other believers with suspicion. From this perspective, those divisions looked absurd. They were like someone trying to cut the ocean into pieces with a pair of scissors. The life in the cup was one single flowing river, and we were all dipping our jars into the same stream. The silver lines of light continued to shimmer before me, growing more intricate until they looked like a vast glowing web that covered the entire earth. It was beautiful, but as I looked closer, I noticed something that made the joy in my chest falter. Not every thread was bright. Some were dim, flickering like a dying candle, and others seemed to be blocked by dark, heavy knots that looked like charred wood. Jesus saw the change in my expression. He didn't have to ask what I was looking at. He moved his hand over the vision, and one of those dark knots began to grow larger until I could see the person it belonged to. It was a man I recognized from a different congregation I had visited years ago. He was standing in a line, waiting to receive the bread, but his face was set in a hard, angry mask. Even as he reached out his hand, his mind was replaying a bitter argument he'd had with his brother. He was rehearsing the insults he wanted to hurl, feeding a fire of resentment that had been burning for years. "Watch," Jesus said softly. The man took the bread. I saw the amber light move toward him, ready to pour into his spirit, but as it touched his hands, it hit a wall. The darkness of his unforgiveness was like a thick, oily barrier. The light didn't enter him, it just slid off, falling away like water off a stone. He ate the bread, but his soul remained gray and thirsty. He walked back to his seat exactly as he had come, perhaps even a little harder, because he had gone through the motions of holiness, while his heart remained a fortress of hate. He is trying to drink living water while holding a cup of poison in the other hand, Jesus explained. His voice wasn't filled with anger, but with a deep, echoing sadness. My grace is a gift, but a gift must be received. You cannot hold on to the darkness and expect the light to occupy the same space. When I told you to examine yourselves before coming to the table, it wasn't because I wanted you to feel guilty. It was because I wanted you to be empty of the things that block my life. The vision shifted again. I saw a woman sitting in a kitchen, her head in her hands. She was crying because she felt she wasn't good enough to take communion. She had made mistakes, she had lost her temper with her children, and she felt like a failure. She thought she had to be perfect to touch the bread. "Look at her heart," Jesus whispered. Inside the woman, I saw no oily barriers of pride or malice. Instead, I saw a deep, hollow space, a valley of humility. She wasn't holding on to her sins, she was grieving them. When she finally went to her church the next Sunday and trembling took the bread, the light didn't just flow into her, it flooded her. It filled every corner of that hollow space. Because she had emptied herself of her own pride, there was room for everything he wanted to give. "The table is for the broken," Jesus said, his eyes shining. "The only people who are truly unworthy are those who think they have no need of me, or those who refuse to love their neighbor. The mistakes of the flesh are washed away by the light, but the stubbornness of the spirit creates the dam." He then showed me a vision that looked like a spiritual battlefield. I saw people walking through their daily lives, going to work, driving in traffic, dealing with difficult bosses. Around them were shadows, dark whispers that tried to attach themselves to their minds. These shadows looked like soot, sticking to their shoulders, whispering thoughts of fear, inadequacy, and greed. I saw one man who had taken communion that morning with a heart full of expectation. As he walked through his office, the shadows tried to touch him, but they couldn't get a grip. There was a faint, amber glow radiating from his skin. Every time a shadow tried to land, The light of the bread he had eaten pushed it back. He was moving through a dark world, but he was carrying his own atmosphere. The world is a place of constant loss, Jesus said, watching the man. Every day, the darkness tries to drain the joy from your spirit. Every day, the noise of the world tries to drown out the sound of my voice. Communion is your protection. It is where you put on the armor of my presence. If you only eat once a month or once a year, you are trying to fight a war while you are starving. You would not ask a soldier to go into battle without food for weeks. Why do you ask your spirit to do the same? He then gestured toward a group of people sitting together in a circle. They were from different backgrounds, different ages, and they clearly had nothing in common in the natural world. But as they broke bread together, I saw the silver threads between them thicken. They became like glowing ropes, binding them so tightly that when one of them leaned over in sorrow, the strength of the others literally flowed through the lines to hold that person up. I saw a young man in the group who was struggling with a secret addiction. He was weak and his own light was dim. But because he was part of that circle, the light from the older woman sitting next to him was traveling across the silver thread and supplementing his own. She didn't even know she was doing it. But her faithfulness was feeding his survival. This is the power of the body, Jesus told me. You are not meant to be strong on your own. When you take the bread together, you are sharing the load. You are pouring your strength into the common cup. When one of you is empty, the rest of the body refills you. But this only happens at the table. When you stay away, or when you take it in isolation of heart, you cut yourself off from the reservoir. I thought of my own church again. I thought of the pews filled with people who sat side by side for years, but never truly knew one another's burdens. I saw how much power we were leaving on the table because we treated communion as a private moment between me and God, rather than a joining of the family. Go back and tell them to look at each other, Jesus said. Tell them that when they lift the cup, they are signing a contract of love with the person standing next to them. If they cannot love the brother they see, they cannot truly receive the life of the Father they cannot see. The bread is one, and you are many, but in the eating, the many must become the one. He then showed me a vision of the early church. I saw a small room lit by oil lamps. The people there were terrified. I could hear the heavy boots of soldiers in the street outside. They knew that being caught meant death, but they were passing a loaf of bread with a reverence that made the air hum. They didn't look like people performing a ritual. They looked like people who were sharing the last bottle of water in a desert. They ate with a desperate, beautiful hunger. As they ate, I saw the light from the bread expand until the entire room was glowing. The fear in their eyes didn't vanish, but it was overruled by a peace that made them look like giants. They were ready to face anything because they had just been infused with the life of the one who had already conquered death. They understood, Jesus said. They didn't have the grand buildings or the books you have now. They only had each other, and they had the table. And it was enough to change the world. They knew that the bread was their heartbeat. Without it, they would have been scattered like leaves in the wind. But with it, they were an army that no empire could crush. I looked at the silver lines again, and I saw how far they had stretched since that small room. I saw that the light I was seeing in the visions was the very same light I had seen in my own church, and the very same light that was now pulsing in the bread on the table before us. It was a single eternal flame, divided into billions of sparks, but never losing its unity. The time is short, Burton, Jesus said, his voice becoming more urgent. The world is growing colder, and the shadows are becoming bolder. My people cannot survive on a memory. They need the reality. They need the transfusion. They need to come to the table not as a habit, but as a homecoming. He reached out and picked up the chalice. The galaxies within the wine seemed to swirl faster, creating a soft, rushing sound like a distant ocean. He held it out toward me, and I felt a pull in my spirit, a desire to drink that was stronger than any thirst I had ever known on earth. I stood there, staring into the swirling depths of the chalice, and for a moment the world of the living seemed like a thin, flickering shadow compared to the weight of the reality in Jesus' hands. He held the cup toward me, but before I could reach for it, he gestured for me to look closer at my own spirit. Suddenly, I could see my own spiritual anatomy. I saw my soul as a complex network of light, similar to the nervous system of a human body. But I noticed that some of the branches were pale, almost translucent, as if they were starving for air. I saw the places where the stresses of my ministry, the late-night hospital visits, the weight of others' secrets, the pressure to always have the right answer, had left jagged, dark marks. I saw how my own spirit had been running on fumes, using my own willpower and my own personality to do the work that was meant to be done by his power. "You have been trying to pour from an empty jar, Burton," Jesus said. His voice was like a soothing balm on a burn. "You think that your study of the Word and your prayers are the only way I reach you, but those are the maps. This," he said, lifting the bread and the cup, "this is the fuel." He broke a piece of the bread and placed it in my hand. It felt warm, almost like it had a pulse. When I ate it, I didn't just taste it, I felt it. The moment it crossed my lips, the amber light I had seen earlier flooded my entire being. It rushed through the pale branches of my spirit, lighting them up with a brilliant golden fire. I felt the jagged, dark marks of my stress and exhaustion begin to smooth over. It was like a spiritual surgery, healing wounds I didn't even know I had. "This is what my people miss," he continued. "They think of this as a duty, a way to show me they are faithful, but I am the one being faithful to them. In this bread, I am giving them my very health. I am giving them the resilience of the kingdom. When the world tries to break them, this bread knits them back together." Then, he showed me a vision of a hospital room. I saw a man lying in a bed, surrounded by machines. He was dying, his body failing him. But a chaplain came in and offered him a tiny crumb of the bread and a drop of the wine. As the man received them, I saw his spirit glow with an intensity that defied the weakness of his physical frame. The machines didn't stop their beeping, and his body didn't suddenly jump out of bed, but his soul became a fortress. I saw the fear that had been hovering in the corner of the room vanish. The light from the communion had anchored him so firmly to Jesus that the transition from life to death became nothing more than a peaceful walk through a doorway. "The bread prepares you for the journey," Jesus said. "Whether it is the journey of a difficult Tuesday or the journey into eternity, you cannot go on your own strength." Next, he showed me a vision of a great celestial workshop. I saw angels moving with purpose, but they weren't building things with wood or stone. They were tending to the golden threads that connected the believers. I saw how, when a group of people gathered with true hearts to break bread, the angels would weave the threads tighter, reinforcing the connections. I saw a vision of a church that was about to split over a disagreement. The people were angry, their hearts were closed, and the silver lines between them were fraying, turning gray and brittle. But then the elder of the church called them to the table. He didn't give a speech, he just broke the bread. One by one, the people began to soften. I saw the light from the bread begin to dissolve the gray, brittle threads. As they ate together, the threads turned silver again, then gold. The argument wasn't solved by logic. It was dissolved by the shared life of the Creator. "This is the miracle of the table," Jesus said. "It is where I do the work that your words cannot. When you bring your brokenness to the bread, I bring my wholeness to you. But you must come with the intention of being changed. If you come only to prove you are right, the bread remains just bread to you." He then showed me a vision of the future, my future. I saw myself standing in my church again, but I was different. I was no longer just a man reciting a liturgy. I saw myself holding the elements and looking at my congregation with tears in my eyes, because I could see the threads. I could see who was hungry, who was hiding, and who was hurting. I saw how my new understanding would act as a catalyst, waking up the sleepy souls in the pews. "You will tell them about the transfusion," he said. "You will tell them that I am not a memory in a book, but a living presence in the bread. You will tell them that every time they eat, they are taking a piece of heaven into their earthly bodies." The vision began to expand. I saw the entire globe covered in a shimmering net of light. Every place where bread was being broken in his name, a pillar of light shot up into the heavens, joining a massive swirling sun of glory. It was a constant, ongoing conversation between earth and heaven. I realized that the Last Supper wasn't last at all. It was the beginning of a feast that has never stopped. It is happening right now in the spiritual realm, and every time we take communion, we are joining that eternal banquet. The table is always set, Jesus said. The invitations are always out, but my people are often too busy, too distracted, or too proud to sit down and eat. They try to find life in their work, in their screens, and in their own efforts, but life is here, in the simple things I have given you. He stepped closer to me, and the light from his presence was so intense I felt like I was melting into him. There was no sense of me and him. There was only us. It was the ultimate communion, the union of the creature with the Creator. In that moment, I understood that the bread and wine are the physical shadows of this perfect union. They are the ways he reaches down into our physical world to pull us up into his. "It is time to go back, Burton," he said. I felt a pang of intense sorrow. I didn't want to leave. I didn't want to go back to the world of shadows, of storms, and of breaking hearts. I wanted to stay in the light. "I will be with you," he promised, answering my unspoken thought. "Every time you break the bread, you will find me there. Every time you lift the cup, you are touching my hand. You are not going away from me. You are going back to bring others to the table." He touched my heart right where the pain had been. Remember the transfusion. Remember the connection. Tell them they are not alone. The hall of light began to swirl. The table, the bread, the chalice, and the face of Jesus began to blur into a vortex of brilliant white light. I felt myself being pulled backward, falling through the layers of the heavens. I saw the stars, the galaxies, the clouds, and then the dark roof of my church. I felt the cold air of the hospital, the smell of antiseptic, and the weight of my own physical body, which felt heavy and clumsy like a suit of lead. I opened my eyes to the sound of a heart monitor. The rhythm was steady. Beep, beep, beep. A nurse gasped, dropping her clipboard. "He's back," she whispered. "Doctor, he's back." The recovery was slow, but my spirit was on fire. I spent those days in the hospital bed reliving every second of what I had seen. I thought about the names of the people in my church. Sarah, Michael, Robert, Linda. I saw their faces, and I saw the golden threads I knew were waiting to be strengthened. I realized that my ministry hadn't ended. It was finally beginning. I have spent the 13 days since my death trying to find the words to describe the indescribable. I have looked at my Bible with new eyes, seeing the mystery of the table woven through every page. I have prayed with a hunger I never knew before. And when I finally stood back in my pulpit for the first time, I didn't give a sermon on theology. I just told them what I saw. I told them about the amber light. I told them about the galaxy in the cup. I told them about the man whose unforgiveness blocked the grace and the woman whose humility opened the floodgates. I watched their faces change. I watched the sleepy look leave their eyes as they realized that the small piece of bread they were about to hold was actually a piece of eternity. I've also discovered something beautiful. When you approach communion with this kind of intentionality, with this kind of reverence and hunger, it transforms you. I find myself more patient with my wife, more generous with my resources, more resistant to temptation, more aware of God's presence throughout my week. It's as if the regular infusions of divine life are gradually transforming me from the inside out, making me more like Jesus bit by bit, week by week. I've started sharing my story carefully at first, then more boldly as I've seen how it impacts people. I've watched as sleepy congregations wake up when they understand what they're really doing at the communion table. I've seen people weep as they take the bread and wine with true understanding for the first time. I've heard testimonies from others who say that treating communion as essential spiritual nourishment has revolutionized their faith. Not everyone receives it well. Some church leaders are suspicious of my experience. Some theologians argue with my interpretation. Some people prefer their comfortable routines and don't want to be challenged to approach communion differently. That's okay. I'm not trying to start a movement or create a new doctrine. I'm just telling you what Jesus showed me. Here's what I want you to understand. If you call yourself a Christian, if you claim to follow Jesus, then Holy Communion is not optional. It's not a ritual to be endured. It's not a symbol to be admired from a distance. It's your spiritual lifeline. It's how you stay connected to the source of all life, all love, all power. It's how you receive fresh infusions of divine grace to combat the darkness that surrounds you every day. The early Christians risked their lives to gather and break bread together. They met in secret in catacombs and homes under threat of arrest and execution. Why? Because they understood what we've forgotten. They knew that communion was essential to their survival, both spiritual and physical. We live in a time when communion has become commonplace, convenient, optional. We fit it in when the schedule allows. We rush through it to get to the potluck or the parking lot. We take it while thinking about 1,000 other things, and we wonder why our faith feels weak, why our churches feel powerless, why Christianity seems to be losing its impact on the world. I'm telling you what Jesus told me. The power is there, the grace is available, the divine life is being offered, but we must receive it intentionally, hungrily, with full awareness of what we're doing. We must remove the barriers that prevent us from fully absorbing what's being given. We must approach the table not as spectators, but as participants, not as observers, but as recipients of the greatest gift ever offered. I died for 20 minutes, and Jesus showed me the truth about Holy Communion. I'm telling you now because someone needs to hear it. Someone needs to understand that what happens at that table is not just symbolic, it's real, it's powerful, it's essential. It's the difference between spiritual survival and spiritual starvation. Don't take my word for it. Ask Jesus to show you. Come to the table hungry. Come with expectation. Come ready to receive. And watch what happens when you treat communion as what it truly is, a transfusion of divine life into your dying soul, a connection to the source of all power, a participation in the greatest mystery of faith. Your life may depend on it. Your faith certainly does. Take and eat, take and drink. Not in mere remembrance, but in vital connection. The bread is his body broken for you. The wine is his blood shed for you. And both are offering you something far more real, far more powerful, and far more necessary than you ever imagined. That's what Jesus showed me. That's what I needed to share. What you do with it is between you and him. I don't care if people think it was a dream or a hallucination. I know what I saw. I know that what happens at that table is the difference between spiritual life and death. The power is real. The connection is essential. Don't just go through the motions. Come to the table hungry. Come ready. Your life depends on it.